The little boy didn't understand why the man outside was crying, but the internet did. Rain hammered against the glass walls of the Grand Preston Hotel while 5-year-old Noah Pierce pressed his small hand against the ballroom window, his blue eyes locked on the soaked figure standing alone beneath the flashing cameras outside. "Mom," he whispered softly, tugging at Claire Pierce's ivory sleeve. "Why is that man looking at our family picture like he lost something?" The music inside the ballroom continued playing, smooth piano drifting beneath crystal chandeliers worth more than most American homes, but at that moment the air felt strangely heavy. Claire froze. Her fingers tightened around the stem of her champagne glass as every conversation around her seemed to blur into distant noise. Across the room stood Alexander Pierce, her husband now, billionaire investor, America's favorite business icon, the man Forbes had once called the coldest negotiator on Wall Street. But tonight there was nothing cold about the way Alexander looked at Claire and the twins. His hand rested protectively on Lily's shoulder while cameras captured what social media would later call the perfect billionaire family. And outside in the rain stood Ethan Crawford, the man who used to have all of it. 6 years earlier, Ethan had been the golden CEO of Crawford Technologies, a fast-rising company valued at nearly $900 million. Young, charismatic, ruthless. The kind of man magazines loved putting on covers beside headlines like the future of American business. And beside him back then was Claire Crawford, 8 months pregnant with twins, standing quietly in the background of every success photo while Ethan took the spotlight she had helped him build. But success changed Ethan slowly at first. Late-night meetings became weekends away. Business dinners turned into luxury vacations Claire was never invited to. Then came Vanessa Blake. 24 years old. Platinum blonde. 3 million followers online. America's newest runway sensation. The tabloids loved her. Ethan loved the attention she brought even more. Claire still remembered the exact night everything shattered. The charity gala at the Belmont Tower Hotel. Hundreds of guests. Flashing cameras. Reporters packed shoulder to shoulder outside the marble staircase while a string quartet played near the fountain imported from Italy. Claire had arrived wearing a soft blue maternity gown, one hand resting carefully beneath her stomach where the twins shifted gently inside her. She thought Ethan had invited her to repair their marriage. Instead, she walked into a nightmare. Because standing beneath the ballroom lights was Ethan, kissing Vanessa Blake in front of every camera in New York City. The room went silent when Claire stopped walking. Some guests lowered their eyes. Others pulled out phones. Vanessa smiled slowly, her diamond bracelet sparkling beneath the chandelier lights while Ethan adjusted his tuxedo like nothing was wrong. Then he looked directly at his pregnant wife and said the sentence that would destroy his reputation forever. "Claire's been emotionally unstable lately," he told the reporters casually. "Pregnancy hormones make people dramatic." A few nervous laughs echoed through the ballroom. Claire felt her throat tighten. Not because of the cameras. Not because of Vanessa. But because deep down, she realized her husband wasn't embarrassed at all. He wanted the humiliation to be public. The silence after Ethan's words felt louder than the orchestra playing beside the ballroom fountain. Claire stood perfectly still beneath the crystal lights while hundreds of eyes moved between her swollen stomach and the woman wrapped around her husband's arm. Somewhere near the stage, a champagne glass clinked softly against marble. Someone whispered her name. Someone else started recording. Vanessa Blake smiled like she had already won. "You should really be home resting," Vanessa said sweetly, brushing invisible dust from Ethan's tuxedo sleeve. "Stress is not good for babies." The cameras flashed harder. Claire felt the twins move inside her stomach, small nervous kicks beneath layers of silk and exhaustion. She pressed one trembling hand against the curve of her belly and forced herself to breathe. In for 4 seconds. Hold. Out for 4. The breathing exercises her doctor taught her. Suddenly felt useless in a room this cold. Ethan barely looked at her. That was the worst part. Not anger. Not guilt. Indifference. Like the woman who spent 7 years helping him build Crawford Technologies no longer existed. Claire remembered sleeping beside him in their tiny one-bedroom apartment in Brooklyn when the company was nothing more than a laptop balanced on milk crates and unpaid electricity bills taped to the refrigerator. Back then Ethan used to kiss her forehead at 3 in the morning and promise, "When we make it, I will give you the world." Now he could not even give her eye contact. "Ethan," Claire said quietly, her voice almost disappearing beneath the music. "Can we please talk privately?" Vanessa laughed before he could answer. "Oh my God, she still thinks this is a marriage conversation." A few uncomfortable guests shifted nearby. Others watched openly now, drawn toward the kind of public disaster people pretend to hate but cannot stop staring at. Ethan adjusted his cufflinks slowly, expensive platinum catching the ballroom lights. "There is nothing left to discuss," he said calmly. "My lawyers already sent the paperwork." Claire blinked. "What paperwork?" Ethan finally looked directly at her. "The divorce papers." The room seemed to tilt sideways. For a second she thought she might faint. Not because the marriage was ending. Deep down she had known for months. The unanswered calls. The perfume on his shirts. The headlines linking his name to Vanessa. No, what shattered her was the timing. 8 months pregnant with twins after years of fertility treatments, and he chose tonight. Publicly. Deliberately. Vanessa crossed her arms with satisfaction, while reporters moved closer, sensing blood in the water. "Honestly," Vanessa said, lowering her voice just enough to sound cruel instead of loud, "this whole sad wife routine is embarrassing." Claire swallowed hard. Her wedding ring suddenly felt heavy enough to break her hand. Then another flash exploded across the ballroom as a gossip blogger shouted from the edge of the crowd. "Ethan, is it true Vanessa is moving into the penthouse?" Ethan smiled. Actually smiled. "Vanessa and I are very happy," he answered. Claire heard several gasps around the room. One older woman near the fountain muttered, "My God." But Ethan continued like none of this mattered. "And I think everyone deserves relationships that reflect who they are becoming." Claire stared at him in disbelief. He was rewriting history in real time. Rebranding betrayal as personal growth. The twins shifted again inside her stomach, stronger this time, and a sudden sharp ache tightened across her lower back. Not pain exactly. Pressure. Stress. Her doctor warned her this could happen. She reached for the edge of a marble table to steady herself. Ethan noticed but did not move. Vanessa did. She leaned closer to him possessively, red lipstick perfect beneath the ballroom lights. Maybe someone should call her driver. Vanessa murmured loudly enough for nearby guests to hear. She looks unstable. The words sliced deeper than Claire expected. Unstable. After years of sacrifices. After every investor dinner she attended smiling through morning sickness. After every lonely holiday while Ethan chased success. Suddenly her phone buzzed inside her clutched purse. Claire glanced down automatically. Unknown number. One message. 3 words. Leave now. Please. Claire frowned slightly. Then another message appeared immediately after. You are not safe there. For the first time all night, real fear slid quietly down her spine. Claire stared at the message while the ballroom noise faded into a dull roar around her. You are not safe there. Her heartbeat quickened beneath the soft music and camera flashes. She looked around instinctively, searching through the sea of tuxedos and glittering gowns for whoever sent it, but all she saw were strangers pretending not to watch her humiliation unfold. Then her phone vibrated again. Another unknown message. Vanessa knows about the twins. Claire's stomach tightened instantly. The twins shifted hard beneath her dress as fear crawled deeper into her chest. Nobody was supposed to know about the complications. Nobody except Ethan. 3 weeks earlier her doctor warned them the pregnancy was now high risk after Claire nearly collapsed during a prenatal appointment in Manhattan. The twins needed reduced stress. Strict monitoring. Stability. Ethan attended exactly 5 minutes of that appointment before leaving for what he called an emergency investor meeting. Later that same night Claire saw photos online of him boarding a yacht beside Vanessa in Miami. She remembered sitting alone in the nursery afterward, folding tiny baby clothes while staring at headlines calling Ethan and Vanessa America's hottest new power couple. Now the same woman stood 20 feet away sipping champagne while smiling at reporters. Claire suddenly realized she could not breathe properly in this room anymore. Every chandelier felt too bright. Every whisper sounded sharper. She turned carefully toward the nearest exit, one hand supporting the underside of her stomach, but Vanessa stepped directly into her path. "Leaving already?" Vanessa asked sweetly. "But the night is just getting interesting." Claire kept her voice calm. "Please move." Vanessa tilted her head slightly, studying Claire with the cold curiosity of someone examining damage after a storm. "You know," she said softly, "Ethan told me you still think having these babies will somehow save your marriage." Claire's face drained of color. Ethan shifted uncomfortably beside Vanessa but stayed silent. That silence hurt more than the words. Vanessa leaned closer, lowering her voice enough that only Claire could hear. "Men like Ethan do not stay with women who remind them of struggle. They upgrade." Claire felt tears burn behind her eyes, but she refused to let them fall here. Not in front of cameras. Not in front of people already waiting for her breakdown. She straightened slowly, drawing one shaky breath after another. "One day," Claire whispered carefully, "you are going to understand exactly what kind of man you are standing beside." Vanessa smiled wider. "And you are about to understand exactly what happens to women who cannot let go." Before Claire could answer, another sharp ache tightened across her stomach. Stronger this time. Her hand gripped the edge of the marble staircase beside her as dizziness swept through her body. Nearby guests immediately noticed. A woman in a silver gown took half a step forward in concern before her husband quietly stopped her. Nobody wanted to interfere with a billionaire scandal unfolding live in front of reporters. Ethan finally looked alarmed. "Claire," he muttered quietly, "do not make a scene." The words hit her like ice water. Not "are you okay?" Not "do you need help?" Do not make a scene. 6 years of marriage reduced to public relations management. Claire swallowed hard and looked at the man she once loved more than herself. She barely recognized him anymore. Then suddenly another voice cut through the tension from across the ballroom. Calm. Deep. Controlled. Interesting advice coming from a man destroying his own family on camera. The entire room seemed to pause at once. Even the reporters turned instantly toward the entrance near the grand staircase. Because walking into the ballroom beneath the gold lights was Alexander Pierce. 6'3". Black tailored suit. Silver watch glinting beneath the chandeliers. The billionaire investor Ethan Crawford hated more than anyone in New York. Conversations exploded into whispers around the room. "That is Alexander Pierce. Why is he here? Did Ethan invite him?" Ethan's expression hardened immediately. Claire noticed something she had never seen before in her husband's eyes. Fear. Real fear. Alexander's sharp blue gaze moved calmly across the ballroom before stopping directly on Claire. For one brief second his composure cracked slightly as he took in her pale face, trembling hands, and visibly exhausted condition. Then his jaw tightened. "Claire," he said quietly, stepping closer, "you should not be standing here alone." The tension inside the ballroom shifted instantly the moment Alexander Pierce stepped forward. Even the reporters lowered their cameras for half a second, like prey sensing a larger predator enter the room. Ethan Crawford straightened his shoulders automatically, but Claire noticed a small crack in his confidence immediately. His jaw tightened. His fingers curled once against the side of his champagne glass. Because everyone in New York business circles knew the history between Ethan Crawford and Alexander Pierce. 3 years earlier they had been partners on the verge of closing the largest technology merger on the East Coast. Then somehow, overnight, confidential designs from Pierce Global ended up inside Crawford Technologies. The scandal nearly destroyed Alexander's company. Investors panicked. Headlines exploded. One junior executive from Pierce Global resigned during the investigation and disappeared from public life completely. Nobody could ever prove Ethan stole anything. But nobody believed he was innocent either. Since then, Alexander Pierce had become something much more dangerous than a billionaire. He became patient. Alexander, Ethan said coldly, forcing a smile for the watching crowd. I do not remember inviting you. Alexander adjusted the cuff of his black suit calmly. You did not. His voice stayed smooth and controlled, but the silence around him felt sharp enough to cut glass. But when I heard a pregnant woman was being publicly humiliated in front of Manhattan's media elite, I became curious. Several reporters exchanged nervous looks. Vanessa crossed her arms defensively beside Ethan. This is a private matter, she snapped. Alexander glanced at her briefly. Then perhaps you should have handled it privately. Claire felt another wave of pressure tighten through her lower back. She shifted carefully against the marble railing, trying not to show how much pain she was in, but Alexander noticed immediately. His eyes moved toward her stomach, then toward her pale face. Have you seen your doctor today? He asked quietly. Ethan scoffed before Claire could answer. Do not pretend you care about my wife. The room fell silent again at those words. My wife. Even now Ethan said it possessively, despite humiliating her in front of hundreds of people less than 10 minutes earlier. Alexander's expression darkened slightly. Interesting, he said. Because you seem to have forgotten she is your wife the moment those cameras turn on. Vanessa stepped closer to Ethan, her diamond heels clicking sharply against the marble floor. Honestly, this is pathetic, she muttered. Claire needs emotional help, not public sympathy. Claire lowered her eyes briefly. Not because Vanessa hurt her anymore, but because she was exhausted. Exhausted from pretending she was not drowning while everyone around her discussed her life like entertainment. Then suddenly her phone vibrated again. Another unknown message. Get away from the staircase. Claire's heartbeat spiked instantly. She looked up instinctively, but the ballroom crowd blocked every clear line of sight. Who was sending these warnings? And how did they know where she was standing? Before she could process it, Vanessa took one slow step closer toward her. Maybe it is time you stop making everyone uncomfortable and go home, Vanessa said softly. Claire tightened her grip against the marble railing. I already was home, she answered quietly. Until you moved into it. A few shocked whispers rippled through nearby guests. Ethan's face darkened instantly. Vanessa laughed sharply, but there was tension beneath it now. You really think those babies are going to keep a billionaire from leaving? She asked. Claire felt the words hit deeper than she expected. Because late at night, alone in the nursery Ethan never finished decorating, she had secretly feared the same thing for months. Then suddenly another sharp pain cut through her abdomen, stronger than before. Claire inhaled quickly and instinctively bent slightly forward. Alexander moved immediately. Claire. His voice changed completely now. No sarcasm. No rivalry. Just concern. Ethan finally noticed the severity in her face. What is wrong? He asked, sounding more irritated than worried. Claire tried to answer, but another tightening sensation stole her breath for a moment. Nearby guests stared openly now. Some looked uncomfortable. Others fascinated. One reporter discreetly lowered his phone, suddenly realizing this was no longer gossip. Alexander stepped closer to Claire without hesitation. You need to sit down, he said firmly. Vanessa rolled her eyes. Oh, please. She is obviously trying to. Suddenly Claire's champagne glass slipped from her trembling fingers and shattered across the marble floor. The sound echoed through the ballroom like a gunshot. And for the first time that entire night, Ethan Crawford looked genuinely afraid. The shattered glass glittered across the marble floor like ice beneath the ballroom lights. For one suspended moment nobody moved. Not the reporters. Not the orchestra. Not even Vanessa Blake with her frozen smile and perfectly manicured hand wrapped around Ethan's arm. Claire pressed one trembling hand against her stomach as another wave of pressure tightened deep inside her body. Her breathing turned uneven. The twins shifted sharply beneath her dress, restless against the stress surrounding them. Claire. Alexander's voice cut through the silence immediately. Calm. Focused. Dangerous in a completely different way now. He stepped forward just as Claire's knees weakened slightly beside the staircase. Ethan instinctively reached toward her too, but hesitated the second cameras turned back toward him. That hesitation lasted maybe half a second. It was enough. Alexander caught Claire gently by the arm before she lost balance completely. Easy, he said quietly. Look at me. Claire lifted her eyes toward him, struggling to steady her breathing. Around them phones were already recording again. Somebody near the ballroom entrance whispered, "Oh my God, she is going into labor." Vanessa's expression tightened instantly. "This is unbelievable," she muttered under her breath. "She always has to make everything about herself." Alexander's head turned slowly toward Vanessa. The look in his eyes made her take one unconscious step backward. "A pregnant woman is in distress," he said coldly. "And somehow you still found a way to complain about it." Ethan stepped forward immediately, his jaw rigid with frustration. "Do not talk to her like that. Then perhaps you should have protected your wife before someone else had to," Alexander answered. The words landed harder than anyone expected. Several guests exchanged stunned looks. Because nobody spoke to Ethan Crawford that way. Not investors. Not journalists. Not competitors. Ethan built an empire terrifying people into silence. But Alexander Pierce never looked intimidated. Not tonight. Not ever. Claire suddenly felt another sharp tightening across her stomach and instinctively gripped Alexander's sleeve. Her face paled beneath the ballroom lights. "I need air," she whispered. Alexander nodded once without hesitation. "We are leaving." Ethan's expression darkened instantly. "She is not going anywhere with you." Claire looked toward Ethan slowly, disbelief flickering across her exhausted face. "You filed for divorce less than 20 minutes ago," she said quietly. "You do not get to control where I go anymore." The silence after those words felt electric. Even the reporters stopped whispering. Somewhere near the stage, a phone notification chimed loudly in the stillness. Then another. Then another. One reporter checked his screen and suddenly looked shocked. "The video is already online," he muttered. 3 million views in 15 minutes. Vanessa's face lost color instantly. Ethan turned sharply toward the reporters surrounding them. Too late. Clips of him publicly humiliating his pregnant wife were already spreading across social media faster than any public relations team could contain. Headlines were appearing in real time. Billionaire CEO humiliates pregnant wife at gala. America's favorite CEO facing backlash. Crawford Technologies scandal explodes online. Ethan's breathing sharpened as he pulled out his phone. His screen flooded with incoming calls. Investors. Board members. Executives. The empire he spent years building was cracking right in front of him beneath crystal chandeliers and camera flashes. And for the first time all night, Claire realized something important. Ethan was not afraid of losing her. He was afraid of losing power. Alexander noticed it too. "Interesting," he said quietly while helping Claire away from the staircase. "Looks like the market finally discovered your character problem." Ethan glared at him. "Stay out of my business." Alexander's expression remained perfectly calm. "Your business is collapsing on live stream. At this point, I think the entire country is involved." A few nervous laughs escaped from nearby guests before quickly dying away. Claire leaned against Alexander slightly as another wave of pain passed through her lower back. Her entire body felt exhausted now. Heavy. Overwhelmed. "We need to get you checked by a doctor," Alexander said. Softly. Claire nodded weakly. Then suddenly one final message appeared on her phone screen from the same unknown number. "Check Ethan's office safe before midnight." Claire frowned in confusion. But before she could process the meaning, the ballroom doors burst open and one of Ethan's senior executives rushed inside looking pale. "Ethan," the man said breathlessly, "the board just called an emergency meeting. Right now." Ethan's face strained completely. And standing beside the shattered glass on the ballroom floor, Claire watched the first crack appear in the empire that once made her feel small. Rain exploded against the black town car windows as Alexander Pierce drove through Manhattan traffic with one hand tight on the steering wheel and the other steadying Claire whenever another wave of pain hit her body. Thunder rolled above the city skyline, while red brake lights stretched endlessly across the wet streets like rivers of fire. Claire leaned back against the leather seat, breathing carefully through each tightening sensation in her stomach while the twins shifted restlessly beneath her dress. "How far apart?" Alexander asked calmly without taking his eyes off the road. Claire checked the timer shaking in her hand. 7 minutes, she whispered. Alexander's jaw tightened slightly. "That is getting too close." Another flash of lightning illuminated his face for half a second, sharp and focused beneath the storm. Claire studied him quietly through her exhaustion. 6 years earlier, Alexander Pierce had been one of the most feared men on Wall Street. Brilliant. Controlled. Impossible to read. The kind of billionaire journalists called emotionally untouchable. Yet tonight he had walked into chaos without hesitation and stood beside her when her own husband would not. The realization unsettled her almost as much as the contractions. Her phone vibrated nonstop against her lap. Headlines. News alerts. Thousands of notifications. Ethan Crawford publicly humiliates pregnant wife. Crawford Technologies stock drops 11% overnight. Billionaire gala scandal goes viral. Claire closed the screen without reading further. She no longer had the strength to watch her marriage become national entertainment. Another contraction hit harder this time. Claire inhaled sharply and gripped the edge of the seat beside her. Alexander glanced toward her immediately. "Talk to me." "I am okay," she lied softly. He gave her a brief look that made it clear he knew she was lying. "You do not have to pretend strength every second," he said quietly. Claire looked down at her wedding ring still sitting on her finger beneath the dim interior lights. Strange. After everything Ethan had done tonight, she still had not removed it. Maybe because taking it off would make everything final. Or maybe because part of her still mourned the man Ethan used to be before ambition hollowed him out from the inside. "Do you know what the saddest part is?" Claire whispered suddenly over the sound of rain hammering the roof. Alexander stayed silent, letting her continue. "I kept thinking if I loved him enough, he would eventually remember who he used to be." Her voice cracked slightly. "I built my entire life around a version of Ethan that does not exist anymore." The car fell quiet except for the storm outside and the rhythmic sound of windshield wipers cutting through the rain. Then Alexander spoke softly. "Sometimes people do not change, Claire." She looked toward him slowly. "Sometimes success simply reveals who they were all along." The words settled heavily inside the car. Deep down, Claire feared he was right. Traffic suddenly slowed ahead near Lexington Avenue. Horns blared through the storm while emergency lights flashed somewhere in the distance. Alexander muttered something under his breath and checked the time on the dashboard. Another contraction hit. Stronger now. Claire bent slightly forward with a quiet gasp before she could stop herself. Alexander immediately reached across the center console, steadying her carefully. "Hey," he said firmly but gently. "Stay with me." Claire nodded weakly. The pressure was building faster now. Too fast. Then suddenly her phone rang again. Ethan. His name glowed across the screen through the darkness. Claire stared at it for 3 full seconds without answering. Alexander noticed but said nothing. The phone continued vibrating insistently in her hand. Finally she picked up. "Claire!" Ethan's voice came through sharp and breathless over background noise. "Where are you?" Claire closed her eyes briefly. "Not are you okay? Not how are the babies? Where are you?" Alexander's expression hardened slightly as he listened silently beside her. "I am going to the hospital," Claire answered quietly. Ethan exhaled hard. "Listen carefully. Do not talk to anyone from the media. Do not make statements. Legal is handling the situation." Claire stared ahead through the rain streaking across the windshield in disbelief. Even now he was thinking about damage control. The situation? She repeated softly. Your children may be coming early tonight, Ethan. Silence. Then muffled voices in the background. Board members. Lawyers. Executives. Ethan lowered his voice immediately afterward. I cannot leave right now. The board is trying to force an emergency vote. Claire felt something inside her finally break apart completely. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Quietly. Like a thread stretched too long finally snapping in silence. Another contraction tore through her body, and she gripped Alexander's arm instinctively. Ethan kept talking on the phone, but Claire no longer listened. Because at that exact moment, Alexander tightened his hand around hers and said the one sentence Ethan Crawford never did. You are not alone tonight. The storm outside Manhattan General sounded like the city itself was falling apart. Rain slammed against the emergency room windows while nurses rushed through bright white hallways and distant thunder shook the glass doors near the entrance. Claire lay in a hospital bed gripping the rails tightly as another contraction rolled through her body harder than the last. Machines beeped steadily around her while a nurse adjusted monitors tracking the twins' heartbeats. 2 rapid rhythms filled the room like tiny racing drums. 6 minutes apart now, the doctor said calmly while checking the monitor screen. We may need to prepare for early delivery if the contractions continue accelerating. Claire closed her eyes briefly, exhausted beyond words. Her makeup from the gala was long gone now, washed away by rain and tears and hours of stress, leaving only pale skin and trembling hands beneath harsh hospital lights. Somewhere between the ballroom and this hospital room, the version of herself that kept begging Ethan Crawford to love her properly had finally disappeared. Alexander stood near the window speaking quietly with hospital staff while rainwater still darkened the shoulders of his black coat. He had not left once since they arrived. Not during admissions. Not during the tests. Not during the frightening moment Claire's blood pressure spiked high enough for 3 nurses to rush into the room at once. He stayed through all of it silently, handling paperwork Ethan should have handled, answering questions Ethan should have answered, standing beside her like it was the most natural thing in the world. Claire watched him from across the room while another nurse checked her for a line. Your husband can stay overnight if necessary, the nurse said kindly without looking up. Claire opened her mouth to correct her automatically, but Alexander answered first. I am staying. The nurse smiled faintly and moved on without another question. Claire looked down quietly at the blanket covering her stomach. Strange how one simple misunderstanding hurt less than the truth. Her phone sat untouched on the bedside table, flashing nonstop with missed calls and notifications. Ethan. Lawyers. Reporters. Unknown numbers. She ignored all of them. Then suddenly the television mounted high in the corner of the room changed from local weather coverage to breaking financial news. Crawford Technologies shares continue falling overnight after viral footage surfaced showing CEO Ethan Crawford publicly humiliating his pregnant wife during a Manhattan charity gala. The anchor announced. Claire's chest tightened slightly as footage from the ballroom filled the screen again. Ethan standing beside Vanessa. Her shattered champagne glass on the marble floor. Millions of strangers replaying the worst night of her life like entertainment. The anchor continued speaking while stock numbers flashed red beneath the footage. Sources close to the board say investors are demanding immediate leadership changes after social media backlash intensified throughout the evening. Alexander walked quietly across the room and muted the television without saying a word. Claire stared at him for a long moment. You do not have to keep fixing things for me, she whispered tiredly. Alexander's expression softened slightly beneath the dim hospital lights. I am not fixing things for you, Claire. He pulled a chair closer beside the bed. I am making sure nobody hurts you again while you are vulnerable. The honesty in his voice unsettled her more than grand romantic speeches ever could. Because there was nothing performative about him. No cameras. No audience. No business advantage. Just quiet protection offered without conditions. Another contraction hit suddenly, and Claire inhaled sharply through clenched teeth. Alexander immediately leaned forward. Hey, he said calmly. Look at me. Claire focused on his steady blue eyes while breathing through the pain exactly like the doctor instructed earlier that month. In. Hold. Out. Slowly the pressure eased again. Good. Alexander murmured softly. You are doing great. The words nearly broke her. Not because they were extraordinary, but because after years beside Ethan Crawford, she realized nobody had spoken to her gently in a very long time. Then the hospital room door opened sharply and a young nurse hurried inside holding a tablet. Miss Crawford, she said nervously. Security downstairs says reporters are gathering outside the maternity entrance. Claire closed her eyes in exhaustion. Of course they were. America loved watching women survive public heartbreak almost as much as it loved causing it. Alexander stood immediately. Move her to a private floor, he said calmly. The nurse hesitated. Sir, administration usually requires approval for. Then tell administration Pierce Global funds this hospital's pediatric cancer wing. His voice stayed perfectly controlled. And tell them I am not asking twice. The nurse nodded quickly and disappeared again. Claire stared at him in disbelief. Did you really just intimidate an entire hospital? Alexander adjusted his cufflinks casually. Only the parts that were being unhelpful. For the first time that terrible night, Claire laughed softly through her exhaustion. A small, fragile laugh. But real. And standing beside her hospital bed while thunder rolled above Manhattan, Alexander Pierce realized something dangerous. He would destroy anyone who made that laugh disappear again. At 3:17 in the morning, the storm outside Manhattan General finally broke apart into steady cold rain, but inside the maternity floor the tension only grew heavier. Nurses moved quickly through quiet hallways while soft alarms beeped from nearby monitors and exhausted doctors whispered updates beside glowing screens. Claire lay curled slightly on her hospital bed, breathing carefully as contractions continued pulling closer together minute by minute. The twins were coming early. Everyone in the room knew it now. A senior doctor adjusted Claire's chart with a tight expression before looking toward Alexander. We are trying to slow labor, she explained carefully. But stress has pushed her body too far tonight. Claire closed her eyes briefly at those words. Stress. Such a small word for something that had quietly consumed years of her life. The doctor continued softly. If the babies arrive tonight, they will need immediate neonatal support. Alexander nodded once without hesitation. Whatever they need, they get. The doctor glanced toward him, recognizing the authority in his voice immediately. Understood. As the medical team stepped away, Claire looked toward the dark hospital window where rain slid slowly down the glass like melting silver beneath city lights. Somewhere across Manhattan, Ethan Crawford was probably still inside a boardroom fighting to save his company while she fought to keep their children safe. The realization no longer hurt the way she expected it to. Mostly it just made her tired. Her phone remained silent now. Ethan had stopped calling nearly an hour earlier. Then suddenly the room television lit up again automatically with another breaking news alert. Sources inside Crawford Technologies report emergency negotiations are underway after investors threaten mass withdrawal overnight, the anchor announced. Meanwhile, social media support continues exploding for Claire Crawford after footage from tonight's gala surpassed 80 million views. Claire looked away immediately, but Alexander watched the screen carefully. Another headline appeared beneath the footage. Billionaire rival Alexander Pierce seen escorting pregnant wife to hospital. The internet was already turning them into a story. Speculation exploded online by the second. Was Alexander helping Claire out of kindness? Revenge? Old feelings? Nobody knew. But millions were watching. Claire laughed weakly under her breath. Apparently America thinks we are having an affair now. Alexander muted the television again. America has always been deeply invested in drama involving rich people behaving badly. Claire smiled faintly despite herself, but another contraction immediately stole the expression from her face. She gripped the bedsheet tightly while pain rolled sharply through her stomach and lower back. This one was stronger. Much stronger. Alexander moved beside her instantly. Breathe, he said calmly. You are okay. Claire nodded weakly while the monitors beside her accelerated faster. Nurses entered quickly after hearing the change in the twins' heart rates. The room suddenly filled with movement again. Medical carts rolled closer. Instructions flew between staff members. Pressure is climbing. Twin B heart rate dropping slightly. Prepare NICU team. Claire's chest tightened with panic. The babies? She whispered shakily. Please tell me they are okay. A nurse squeezed her hand gently. Right now we just need you calm. Calm. Claire almost wanted to laugh at the impossibility of that word. Then suddenly the hospital room door opened sharply again and a man in a dark suit stepped inside looking visibly nervous. One of Ethan's executives. Claire recognized him immediately from company events. Daniel Mercer. He looked exhausted, tie loosened, rainwater still dripping from his coat. Mrs. Crawford, he said carefully, I am sorry to interrupt, but there is something you need to know. Alexander's expression darkened instantly. This is not the time. It cannot wait, Daniel answered. Quietly. He glanced uneasily toward Claire before continuing. The board just voted to remove Ethan as CEO. The room fell completely silent. Even the nurses stopped moving for half a second. Claire stared at him in disbelief. Ethan Crawford had spent 10 years building Crawford Technologies into one of the fastest-growing companies in America. His entire identity was tied to power, control, success. And tonight all of it collapsed in a matter of hours. Daniel swallowed hard before adding one final sentence. And Vanessa Blake just released a public statement saying she was never in a relationship with him. Claire blinked slowly. The betrayal almost felt poetic. Ethan had destroyed his family for a woman already abandoning him to save her own reputation. Alexander studied Claire carefully, expecting satisfaction or anger or vindication. Instead, he saw only sadness. Quiet, exhausted sadness for a man who traded everything meaningful for temporary applause. Another contraction slammed through Claire suddenly, and this time she cried out softly before she could stop herself. Alarms immediately sharpened around the room. The doctor turned quickly toward the monitors. That is it, she said firmly. We are out of time. We need to move now. And as nurses rushed Claire's bed toward the delivery floor beneath harsh hospital lights, Alexander Pierce walked beside her without leaving her side for even a second. The delivery room lights felt almost unreal after the darkness of the storm outside. Everything moved too fast and too bright at once. Nurses adjusted monitors. Doctors spoke in urgent, calm voices. Medical equipment beeped steadily while rain continued tapping softly against the hospital windows 30 floors above Manhattan. Claire lay exhausted beneath white blankets, gripping Alexander's hand so tightly her fingers trembled. Another contraction tore through her body, and she cried out softly before collapsing back against the pillow breathless. You are doing great, the doctor said firmly. Stay with us, Claire. Alexander stood beside her without moving an inch. His expensive suit jacket had long since disappeared somewhere in the chaos hours earlier. His sleeves were rolled up now, tie loosened, dark hair slightly damp from the storm and stress and sleeplessness. He looked nothing like the untouchable billionaire magazines worshipped on business covers. Right now he looked like a man terrified of losing someone important. Claire turned her head weakly toward him between contractions. I am scared, she whispered honestly for the first time all night. Alexander tightened his hand around hers immediately. I know. His voice stayed low and steady beside her. But you are not facing this alone. The words anchored her more than the medication or machines ever could. Another doctor entered quickly holding updated scans. Twin A is ready, she announced calmly. We need one final push. Claire nodded weakly through tears and exhaustion. Somewhere deep inside herself she found one final piece of strength she did not know remained. Not for Ethan. Not for her broken marriage. For the 2 tiny lives depending on her. Minutes later the first cry finally echoed through the delivery room. Small. Sharp. Beautiful. Claire broke apart instantly at the sound. Tears slid freely down her face as nurses carefully wrapped the tiny baby boy in a blue blanket beneath the bright lights. "You have a son," the nurse whispered warmly. Claire looked toward the tiny crying bundle in disbelief. "Noah," she whispered through tears. Alexander stared at the child silently, emotion finally cracking through the careful walls he spent years building around himself. Then only minutes later another cry filled the room. Softer this time. A little girl wrapped in pink. Tiny fingers curling weakly around the nurse's glove. "And here is your daughter." Claire sobbed openly now as the babies were placed briefly beside her. Noah and Lily. Small miracles breathing beneath hospital lights while thunder faded far above the city skyline. Alexander stood frozen beside the bed staring at the twins with something dangerously close to all. The nurse smiled faintly toward him. "Would you like to hold your son?" Alexander blinked once, clearly caught off guard. His voice almost failed him for the first time all night. Claire looked toward him softly through exhausted tears. "Go ahead," she whispered. Alexander carefully lifted Noah into his arms like something sacred. The room fell strangely quiet around him. The billionaire feared by Wall Street stood completely still holding a 6-pound newborn against his chest, while the tiny baby wrapped one impossibly small hand around his finger. And in that exact moment something changed forever inside Alexander Pierce. A nurse quietly snapped a photograph without anyone noticing. Years later that picture would appear framed inside their family home. But tonight it was simply a tired man holding a child he already knew he would protect with his entire life. Then suddenly the delivery room doors opened sharply. Ethan Crawford stood there breathless in a rain-soaked overcoat, eyes wild from panic and exhaustion. He looked nothing like the polished CEO from the gala. The room immediately went silent. Ethan's gaze moved toward Claire first. Pale. Exhausted. Holding their daughter against her chest. Then his eyes shifted toward Alexander standing beside her with Noah in his arms. The image hit harder than any headline ever could. Ethan took one slow step forward. "Claire!" His voice cracked slightly. Claire looked at him quietly across the room. No anger. No screaming. Somehow that hurt worse. Ethan swallowed hard as his entire world collapsed in front of him beneath fluorescent hospital lights. His company was gone. Vanessa abandoned him. The board erased him in one night. And now another man stood beside the family he destroyed with his own hands. Noah shifted softly inside Alexander's arms and opened his tiny eyes for the first time. Ethan stared at his son in silence. Then the baby settled peacefully against Alexander's chest like he already knew exactly where safety was. And standing there alone while rain slid silently down the hospital windows behind him, Ethan Crawford finally understood the cruelest part of losing everything. It was not losing the empire. It was realizing too late that another man had become the father his children would remember.